Thank you. Hello, welcome back from the break. As mentioned, I am a sex, intimacy, and relationship coach, and I will be talking about debunking the myth that true connection exists only within a long-term partnership, and how intimate and beautiful connections, contrary to popular belief, can and do exist in casual sexual encounters. I often try to ask myself and my clients the question, is that a truth or is that a belief? Is this thing I am saying, hearing, buying into actually a fact, or is it just something I've heard repeated so many times I've never questioned it? So to give a silly example, one of my favorite animated and later live action films is the story of a young mermaid who is obsessed with human beings up on land, and she is desperate to be part of their world. Early in the film, she sings, "I want to be where the people are. I want to see them dancing, walking along on there." And then she stops and she says, "What's that word again?" "Oh, feet." And then she continues singing. She has trouble remembering the word feet because she's a mermaid. We accept that. However, the plot of the story, the driving force for our main character is that she will give up literally anything, even her own voice, to get feet. But because we've heard it so many times, we don't question that feet is a word she can't remember. In the film, an unhinged seagull taught her words like whatchamacallit and thingamabob, and she retains those, but feet, the one-syllable word for the thing she wants most, just, we've heard it over and over again, so we just accept it. Now, obviously, it is not terribly important to undo an irrelevant plot point in a children's film. But the rules, the norms, and the parameters around sex and intimacy and love are like that too. There are so many things that we believe simply because they've been repeated for our entire lives. Things about how sex should make us feel, what falling in love is like, and the safety and security it's supposed to provide. What makes a good relationship? Things that may or may not apply to us individually and certainly are not universally true. So the one I want to discuss today, to question, is one I've heard so many times whenever I speak about casual sex, meaning sex outside of a long-term romantic relationship. It's this phrase, "Oh, I can't do that. I need a connection." The that being casual sex, a one-night stand, sex in a sex club or a sauna, or even a fuck buddy. And the implication is, of course, that casual sex is inherently disconnected, lacking intimacy. And partnered sex is implicitly connected, intimate. Up until very recently, I would respond, wanting to validate the other person's experience. Yeah, I get that. But when and why do we all accept that casual sex has to be disconnected? Now, there's a quick qualifier here. Absolutely nothing wrong with sweaty, visceral, one-and-done sex with a perfect stranger that is purely physical and without an intimate connection. It can be really fun. When talking about the possibility of intimacy in casual sex, I want to be clear, I'm not implying that there's anything wrong with body-based sex without intimacy in or out of a relationship. Sidebar done. Okay, so I would argue that the reason our casual interactions can lack connection, lack intimacy, is not because of the situation or the circumstance. I believe it is fear that holds us back from allowing connection, intimacy, and even love into our connections with a stranger who's often seeking the same things. I believe it is our binary thinking, either or. I also believe there's a source of fear that we rarely talk about, our obsession with finding the perfect relationship, the constant pressure to find that relationship with one person, to meet the one, and to be together for the rest of your life till death do you part. The romance myth, Dean Spade calls it in his fantastic book, Love in an Effed Up World. And this myth has so many damaging effects that Dean discusses at length in the book, but among those, it teaches us that monogamy is not only the highest form of intimacy, but conversely it implies that non-coupled connections are less valid, or even not real. And on top of all this pressure to find this mythical perfect love, we then heap a whole other level of binary garbage. Either your relationship lasts forever, or it was a failure. Either one of you dies while you're still together, or your marriage was a disaster. Do not pass go, do not collect alimony. Relationships are pass fail, and you failed. So with this obsession with A, finding your soulmate, and B, living out the rest of your life together or you failed, how can we feel like we can have permission? How can we give ourselves permission for emotional connection, for intimacy with someone we barely know? It's a little bit like a mermaid wanting feet, but forgetting the word feet. When we're seeking connection, we stop ourselves from connecting. The desire to someday find the right, meaningful, lifelong, not to mention perfect relationship can block us from allowing ourselves beautiful and honest intimacy today. Our search for intimacy and our fears about intimacy create the barriers to experiencing it. But it doesn't have to be that way. We can be connected and deeply intimate with someone we just met. So I want to give an example of that possibility by talking about something I find incredibly intimate: wordless consent. Silent, implied, but clear and agreed upon consent. Now, I came into my sexuality in the US in the 80s and 90s, and we did not have the discussions around consent that we are thankfully finally having today. We were taught only the binary, sex or assault. And I was taught as a male, because of heteronormative and sexist assumptions, if she says no, you stop. That was the whole conversation. It's only non-consensual if the woman says out loud, no. And that was what I was taught consent meant. So the first time I went into a fetish bar for only men, I was interested in but terrified of trying some kinky new things, and I didn't know what to expect. I was nervous because could I be in this environment, naked and implying consent, and not do things I didn't want to do? I had no idea how consent even worked in these spaces. But what I found, what these kinky men taught me, was the beauty of wordless implied consent. They didn't choke me or slap me or just piss on me from the get-go. They pushed their hand with just a little pressure against my throat, physically asking, "Do you like that?" Or tapped my face lightly, inquiring, "Would you like that harder?" Splashed a little urine on my leg, wondering with me, "Do you want more of that, and where?" It was always a question. And the most beautiful part, the most connected, intimate element in this raunchy, kinky environment is that it was always so clear to me, so lovingly clear, that the answer no, even if silent, was perfectly acceptable. No shame, no guilt, no pressure. I only want to do things with you that you also have the desire to do with me, otherwise we stop, no questions asked. That is a connection. That is intimacy. I was having sex in situations where I could not be further from the binary, romantic, monogamous relationship, and in those rooms of sweaty, nameless strangers, I was made to feel safe enough to connect and explore my sexual boundaries. I believe we complicate and we limit what intimacy can be when we put these parameters, time, status, cohabitation, marriage, on the legitimacy of our intimate interactions. We diminish their power, their value, their importance, and their frequency. We sacrifice the act and beauty of intimacy to this false definition subject to outside forces and labels and time, and we block ourselves from the connection we so deeply crave. Partners cuddling in a bed is intimate, and a group of sweaty strangers at an orgy, pleasing each other's sexual desires, is also intimate. Intimacy can exist in knowing someone for years and in a knowing glance of shared humor between strangers on a train. When we insist on correlating longevity to intimate connections, we serve to limit the intimacy, connection, and even the love in our lives. We limit our potential for joy and pleasure. Often when I tell monogamous people the story of a gorgeous, anonymous sexual encounter, they either say that phrase, "I could never do that, I need a connection," or they ask, "Aren't you going to see him again?" Now, the latter seems less judgy, but in some ways it feels worse. Asking me, "But aren't you going to see him again?" is not accepting the experience as valid unless it turns into some longer version of a relationship that resembles their own, that buys into that relationship myth. Because is it not intimacy to give and receive perfect mutual pleasure with another human being with no strings attached, no conditions? We think we need those strings because without them, we feel untethered and therefore unsafe. We think it's not intimate unless there are conditions that imply a future. But sharing pleasure with another human and then asking nothing more of them can be incredibly intimate. I once had sex with a French man in Paris in this gym sauna thing. And he laid with me for a good 45 minutes afterwards. And we gently stroked and caressed and kissed one another. And he said one word to me the entire time. Right before he left, he just said, merci. We had a perfect, intimate connection. And I never saw him again. I had a perfect experience with the guy in Madrid who first put me in a sling. And he's still my Facebook friend. The man in my first sex club, the man my ex and I had a threesome with, who is now one of my dearest friends, the first guy who peed on me, and even the man who had an orgasm inside me, whose face I never saw, those are all perfect, as perfect as the sex people have with their spouse. Because intimacy does not require qualification or labeling, and it does not need a hierarchy. All these different forms of intimate sexual connection are wonderful, and none of them negate one another. It doesn't have to be either or, fucking or making love, forever or fail. Intimacy, I believe, is a choice. It doesn't magically appear with time, and it can go away, no matter how long you've been together. Intimacy is an agreement between partners right now in this moment, regardless of those external parameters determined by some arbitrary amount of time. We can choose to be intimate anywhere, anytime we want. This binary fear-based way of thinking, either or, good, bad, moral, sinful, the one or no one, it reduces the human experience to a simplistic and false dichotomy that diminishes the complex potential that we have as sexual human beings. And undoing our binary thinking is not only important because of how it affects our casual encounters, that fear also affects how much we allow ourselves to love our partners in a relationship while simultaneously isolating us from our connection to community. But that is a whole other lecture, and my time is almost up. So I will wrap up by saying this. We can let go of some of these old ideas about sex and intimacy. We can seek connections beyond the ones we learned as children and repeated our whole lives. That little mermaid may not remember the word for feet, but like so many of us, she does want to escape the parameters, the confines, and the assumptions that are blocking her joy. She wants to connect with strangers, even though everybody says she shouldn't. We can allow ourselves to connect, to breathe, to fuck, to love, and to be truly intimate in myriad ways, well beyond what we think our limits are, even if it's only for tonight. Thank you so much.